50 Great Short Stories. The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of blood. There was sharp pain and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress and termination of the disease were in the incident of half an hour. But Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friend from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled in it. This wall had a gate of iron. The quarters, having entered, brought furnace and messy hammers and welded the bolt. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to a sudden impulse of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precaution, the cautious might be defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was fully to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the affluence of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisators, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluntary scene, then masquerade. But first let me tell of the room in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls to either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Hence the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartment was so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at which turn a noble effect. to the right and left, in the middle of which wall the tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the winding of the shoot. This window were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decoration of the chamber into which it opened. That at the western extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its window. The second chamber was purple in its ornament and tapestry, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casement. The first was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestry that hung well over the ceiling and down the walls, falling the heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the window failed to correspond with the decoration. The panes here were scarlet, the deep blue color. Now in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp and candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornament that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the chute of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the chute, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber of the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted pane was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon a countenance of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precinct at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dual, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance, to hearken to the sound, and thus the vultures performers ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconnect of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the hideous grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brow as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, which to others that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after a lapse of the 16 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then with the same disconnect and tremulousness and meditation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent level. The taste of the talk was peculiar. He had a fine eye for color and effect. He disregarded the decora, the mere fashion. His plans were bold and fierce. His conception glowed with barbaric luster. There were some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. He was necessarily to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, in it a movable embellishment of the 7 chambers, upon occasion of this great fete, and each his own guiding taste, which had given character to the masqueraders. But be sure, they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter, and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs, appointment. There were delirious punch, such as the madman passions. There were much of beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro, in the 7 chambers, there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these dreams whisked in and about, taking hue from the room, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon, the strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the ballet. And then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silence save the voice of the clock. The dreams are steep frozen as they stand, but the echoes, the chime of die away, they have endured but an instant, and the light, half subdued laughter float after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dream live, and wreathes to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tined window, through which stream the rays from the triplet. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the masks of bench, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the stable drapery appalls, and to him, whose foot falls upon the stable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ear who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartment. But this other apartment was densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly of heart of life, and level went whirling on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told, and the revolution of the waltz were quieted, and there was an easy cessation of all things as before, Now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a huge murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, horror, and of disgust. In assembly in pantomimes such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such a sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-heralded Herod and gone beyond the bound of the even prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords of the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even if the elderly roast, to whom life and death are equally just. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the custom and bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor prosperity existed. The figure was all tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliment of the grave. The mask which concealed the vestige was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of the stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of Red Death. His vesture was dipped in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the vultures, he was seen to be convulsed. In the first moment, with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. "Who there?" he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize man and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlement." It was in the eastern and blue chamber, in which stood in the Prince Prospero at his uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue rooms where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now the deliberate and stately step, made close approach to the speaker, but from the certain nameless awe with which the mad assumption of the murmur had inspired the whole party, there were found none who pulled Puss's hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the room to the halls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet. A decided movement had been made to arrest in was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentarily cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet within the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterward, fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the rebels at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shape of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror in finding the grave ceremony and corpse-like mask which they handed with so violent and rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a ship in the night, and one by one dropped the rebels in the blood-beddy holes of their level, and died which in the despairing push of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flame of the tripod expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.